Hello, and welcome to the BUS 125 Business English Lecture on Verbs. Let's get started. The main goal of listening to this lecture is to help you understand the different kinds of verbs, know about principal parts, and with a focus really on the irregular verbs. And then the second part of the lecture will be about understanding the difference between transitive and intransitive verbs. Specifically, we're going to focus on the words lie and lay, sit, set, rise, and raise. And sit, set, rise, and raise are pretty easy, but most people really mess up lie and lay. And as I have exampled here, did you know that you actually can't lay down unless it was yesterday? The grammatically correct way to do it is to lie down. But if it was yesterday, you might have lay down yesterday. What? More of this in a moment. So let's continue. Let's start again with understanding verbs, that they are one of the parts of speech. And you've probably also felt a little bit about this already in some of the exercises we've done, that you can have different types of verbs, that action verbs, where I have a couple of examples here. You can actually have what we call those being verbs, and we've seen that those are linking verbs, such as the am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. And I have this kind of Zen being sign here in terms of just be, because that's what being verbs are. But you can also have linking verbs that are verbs that indicate a condition, like seems, appear, looks, smell, and feels. There's really no action there with those, but they're more indicating a state of being. Like the flower smells good. Like it's not as if the flower is actually doing any smelling. But smell can be action. You can say, I smelled the coffee. And then you can see the action there. But generally, a lot of these fall into the condition kind of verbs. And then we have a bunch of helper verbs, and some of them are listed here, but there are several others. And I'll show you a chart that you can refer to in a little bit. So the being verbs simply state something that is, and they might be the main verb of the sentence or a helper. And then in the case of Joe is the boss, we talked about this. This is like Joe equals the boss. There it's the main verb, but you can see down here in the second one, it's actually helping form with the action verb acting. Joe is acting like the boss. So your being verbs can be helpers or the main verb sentence. And here are all the other helping verbs. And I actually always remember these with this goofy little moniker up here. Maybe Mr. Do should have a will. And your helper verbs may, might, and must. All the being verbs here. Your do, does, and did. Your should, could, would, your have, had, has, and your will, can, and shall are all operating as helping verbs. So hopefully this chart you will find helpful. If you would like to take a look at self-assessment A, this would be a good time to pause this and do that to make sure that you can get a sense of what the different verbs are, and I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, let's talk about regular verbs. And when we go to conjugate verbs, we simply call the parts of the verb the principal parts, and there are four main parts. And you're probably very familiar with the present tense, and you're probably familiar with the past tense. I know you've used the past participle and the present participle, but maybe you didn't know that that's what they were called. So in the case of the verb move, you might say I move today, but yesterday I moved. The past participle would use a helper. It might say something like, I had moved the piano when the movers called and told me they would do it. So past participle is usually relating something that happened in the past to something else. And then the present participle, that's, something you're doing now. I am moving the piano. Same with prepare, or call, enter, whatever your verb is. Regular verbs follow a very nice predictable pattern. The past tense is usually in ed form. The past participle is the same, and the present participle is in ing form. Always used with a helper, though. The last two here, always used with a helper. The past and present participles. Participle just means part. Okay, on. So let's take a look at what these might look like. The past tense looks something simple like the boss called me on Sunday. But your past participle is going to look a little different, like John invited me over for a barbecue, but the boss had called me into work. And you can see how you still have the ed, but in this case you have a helper. And in this case you do have two different things going on, and that's why you're using the past participle to indicate which one happened when. Now, irregular verbs, probably one of my favorite parts of the quiz is being able to quiz you on irregular verbs. And there's a table in your book, I believe it's on page 111, but there's a few that aren't in there, and I have them highlighted here because they are my favorites. I love burst, And I love forecast. I actually love swim too, because the past participle of swim, do you know it? It's swum. That's right, swum. Swum is a word, but only when used with a helper. Like, I had swum the English Channel when they decided to close it down for pollution or something. Or you could say, yesterday I swam the English Channel. The reason I like burst and forecast so much is that the past of burst and forecast is the same as the present, and the past participle is the same. So, for example, today the stock market burst. Yesterday it burst. The stock market had burst before the Greece crisis occurred. Burst, burst, and burst. And the same with forecast. Today the weatherman forecast the weather. Yesterday he forecast the same thing. And John Coleman had forecast rain before he's noticed that the sun was out. So those are two of my favorites. They don't appear in your list, but I like them because they're the same in the present, the past, and the past participle. So just know that, and also page 11 of your text, a handy thing to have by you when you're taking the quizzes and tests. Okay, let's move on. If you would like to give Self-Assessment E a try, now is a good chance to do that, and you can do that by pausing this recording. And that also concludes our preliminary discussion on verbs. Thanks.